Recording. Okay, so let's make a formal introduction for our listener. Good afternoon. Well, good morning to you. Good afternoon to me, Alan. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C. From the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Alan Howarth accepted our invitation to our show. Alan, welcome to the show, man.
All right, thank you for having me on your show. This is great to share whatever it is I've done with the rest of the group here.
I got you. Thank you very much. So let's go back to the beginning. You know, for a year and a half, we live in crazy time with the COVID. Some people believe in the vaccine. Some people don't believe it. It's free for everybody. Whatever, you know, how the COVID is affected your life, your sanity, your inability to play live and whatever. How you holding up, man?
Well, I guess the most negative impact is the fact that usually this time of the year, there's a lot of horror movie conventions, and I'm invited to those both as a personality to sign autographs, and then I also play live concerts. Yep. So I have a 1 hour set that I play with my MIDI keyboard and my guitar, and I have a synchronized movie clips that go with each of the cuts. So it's like a movie soundtrack, but I'm the soundtrack live. Wow. So that's a lot of fun. So that's been impacted. This year I only have 3 concerts. I played in Middleton, New York at a drive-in theater for Labor Day. So everybody's in their car. That worked out fine. Then I'll do another one in Hot Springs, Arkansas, October 1st at the Hot Springs Horror Film Festival. And I have another show coming up in Boston at the Coolidge Theater on Mischief Night, Halloween, October 31st, October 30, and it turns October 31st. And then there's a 12-hour movie marathon. They played 12 hours of horror movies from midnight to noon the next day. So that'll be a lot of fun.
And you're going to be the 8 hour there? Or you do 1 hour on and on?
Yeah, no, I do 1 hour and then they just play the movies, and I have, I visit with the people. Gotcha. It's interesting stuff. We'll talk about all the music and the sound effects, but interesting recently, when I was in high school, when I first was introduced, or even grade school, introduced to music, I was actually focused on being an artist. So I'm actually very good at drawing and illustration, stuff like that. So I've also started another little sidebar where I'm now doing illustrations by hand of scenes from the movies that I worked on. And if it's like Big Trouble, I put a couple bars of the music and a drawing of the truck or Lopan or stuff like that. Or if it's Halloween, I do an illustration with the knife and the blood, and I'll put a couple bars of the music and sign those. So I started with another little artistic career just in our COVID diversity.
I got you.
For something to do. So that was fun. It was something I could do with the sound effects work. Besides, I worked on that movie, something else I could create new product. So that's been fun.
That's fascinating. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, when you began the equivalent of taking piano lesson or guitar lesson, like every
kid? Yeah. All right. So in the way back, I grew up in New Jersey. I was in East Brunswick, New Jersey. Yeah. And my dad had a little 12 key accordion up in the attic that I said, "Dad, what's this?" And then I remember playing, and I took local lessons from a local teacher that was also on television. He thought he was a big deal. And I remember being down in his basement doing my little polka, and I finally got both hands going. I thought I was really cool. Yeah. And my mom had taken me to the lesson, and I'm playing, and there's no teacher. I'm down in his basement. I'm waiting, and I'm playing. There's no teacher. And finally, my mother dashes in and says, "We're leaving." What? We're leaving. So packed me up, and that was the end of my lesson. I found out later that the teacher had put the moves on my mom, and she didn't like that. So that ended my accordion lessons very early. I was like 5, 6 years old, and then picked up instruments. It got to be like the 3rd grade, and they're starting the school band, and they send a little letter home that your son has some music aptitude. So I was all about that. So I said, "Mom and Dad, I have musical talent. Support me." So obviously they were in the business of renting musical instruments. They were trying to sell instruments. So I looked at the band in school, and the only cool instrument I wanted, either guitars or pianos. They didn't offer that, but they had the saxophone. So for me, that was the other cool instrument in the band. So I took up alto saxophone, and so that sort of started me on the trail of music, playing in the school band. And then years later, I was like a junior in high school. I was now the president of the art class, and one of the girls that was in the art class said, my boyfriend Dave has a band, and he's playing. They're playing at a Catholic girls' high school locally. Now, by then I had already moved to Cleveland, Ohio. So, high school started in Cleveland.
Okay.
And so I went and sat down. Played 3 hours of music, playing the saxophone on dance band music, that stuff. And at the end of the night, he handed me $80, and my eyes went wide.
Wow, that was a lot of money back then, right?
I went, hell with art. I'm going for music.
Yeah.
So then Dave also had a rock band, and so he said they needed a bass player. So I pestered my mom to buy me a bass guitar, and I got my Sears and Roebuck little bass amp, and I quickly learned how to play bass guitar, and that started me on the rock and roll path. Then I played in a lot of rock bands in the Cleveland area. Cleveland's a rock and roll kind of town.
Yeah.
Our band became popular on the west side of Cleveland. It was called the Tree Stumps. Out of the Tree Stumps, years later, one of the major artists that came through the Tree Stumps, which eventually got renamed as Silk, was a fellow named Michael Gee, who was Michael Stanley. His real name was Michael Gee. He was Michael Stanley, and he became a local personality in. Let's keep going out here. A local personality in the Cleveland area, and the producer of the record for the band called Silk, which was the Ghost of the Tree Stumps, was Bill Szymczyk. Bill Szymczyk went on to produce also the James Gang at the same time, which was Joe Walsh. And so we were a sister group with the Joe Walsh of the James Gang, and then the Silk were the two bands that were managed by the Belkin brothers, the local talent managers. And eventually Bill Szymczyk went on to the Eagles, and that's how Joe Walsh wound up in the Eagles, was through Bill Szymczyk.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the original music effort. Then I kind of got frustrated in the local music scene, because we wanted to write music. We don't want to play cover songs, et cetera, et cetera. So I went into a long period where we rented an office above a pawn shop in sort of a shady neighborhood in Cleveland on East 55th. And we would just go and jam all night. And that band we called the Pie Corporation. And the Pie Corporation CD is actually available on my website, alanhowarth.com. And that was sort of my first adventure into creating music. At the time, I bought a synthesizer. I had got an EML 101. Worked at a music store, so I now had a synthesizer and 2 Echoplexes and my guitar and all the effects on it. And so that was a lot of my pioneering. My favorite bands at the time were like the Moody Blues. Pink Floyd was really my heroes. Obviously the Beatles. I wasn't like a Stones guy. I was more like the Beatles guy. I liked sort of that prog rock stuff. Genesis was a big influence on me. And so I was sort of a phase there. It gets to be the mid 70s, and one of the bands we came in contact was a band called Weather Report, and the sound guy from the Pie Corp band, which eventually was disbanded, never made a record, stuff like that, but I was invited to go out and work with Brian Risner, who was now with Weather Report, and became the keyboard technician for Joe Zawinul from Weather Report. So my job, I was like the butler. I set up these 8 keyboards every day, got them all in tune, got everything tuned up, and then I could turn around to Joe Zawinul and go, okay, Joe, it's all working, you can play now. So I toured with the band the whole world, 76 to 80, and that got me to Los Angeles. Then another, nothing was planned. I blessed from those up there, the big managers. And a big burly biker buddy of mine from Cleveland was now working at Paramount Pictures, and he was working in the transfer bay. He's just making copies of tapes for duplication, stuff like that. And there's these 2 sound effects editors, Steve Flick and Richard Anderson, are standing behind him, saying that they need somebody who knows about synthesizers to work on this movie. And he turns around and goes, "Oh man, you got to talk to my buddy Alan, man. Yeah, he works for Weather Report. He knows all about synthesizers." And they look at him and they go, "Weather Report, is that the one at 11 o'clock or 7 o'clock?" Thinking Weather Report, meteorology.
Yeah, I know.
But nonetheless, they took my name, and I went down and met them. And they were working on Star Trek, the motion picture. So this is when Star Trek went from TV to movies, and they wanted to create a palette of sounds, and they wanted someone to be creative. So I made them an audition tape of the sound effect of the Starship Enterprise going from warp 1 to warp 7, which was a scene in the movie where they had to do this big acceleration. And I was in my little dining room studio with a Prophet 5 synthesizer and a little TAC 4-track tape recorder, basic stuff that I had because I was interested in, I still had music, and turned that tape in, and it became the sound of the Enterprise, and I got the job. So all of a sudden I went from rock and roll to jazz. Now I was in the movie business. That was my first movie.
How old were you at the time?
This put me, this would be 1980. So I was around 33.
Gotcha.
So it was a perfect time to, stop traveling the world and from living life from the back of the bus and living on beer and pretzels, and so it became a career. My wife's name is Melody. She's from originally Cleveland. So I married a melody, which is another whole alignment of, golly, a musician, he marries a melody, that's your wife, and your kids come out of melody and all this other stuff. So it's been around. The interesting thing is, so got introduced to the movie business through Star Trek. The picture editor from that first Star Trek movie, a fellow named Todd Ramsey, his next assignment was the movie Escape from New York. And I had been giving Todd my cassettes of music and promoting myself and saying who I am and what's going on. And so he thought, well, you and John Carpenter might get along. You should meet him. So John Carpenter came over to my little dining room studio, which now had grown because of Star Trek. I now had more synthesizers and tape recorders and a mixer. It was a little more sophisticated, but still just in the dining room. It wasn't like a real studio. Carpenter sat around for about 3 hours, and I played him sounds and music. And the end of that meeting, he goes, "Oh yeah, let's do it." So all of a sudden, I was now scoring movies with John Carpenter. First one being Escape from New York. So that was Escape from New York, was my first film score.
Yep.
So that really launched me in the world of composing for movies with John Carpenter. Obviously, he's John Carpenter. He plays himself. So he walks in, he does the first pass because it's his movie. He's edited, he wrote it, all this other stuff. And so my initial job with him was basically to keep all the synthesizers in tune and keep the tape recorders going. And when the red light's on, make sure that it was getting recorded. Over time, he let me participate more, and we became more of let me collaborate with him. And certainly he didn't want to know anything about the technology. That was one of his things. A couple of times I tried to explain something technically to him, and he'd go, "Alan, that's your job. I don't even want to know. Just make sure it works." So that was his focus. So I went on with Carpenter from Escape from New York. Right after that, now we're like 1981, going into 82. And he says, "Well, my next movie is going to be The Thing, and I'm going to be really busy. And they want to make a sequel to Halloween. So you're going to do Halloween, like an assignment. You go do Halloween. I'm busy." So he handed me the assignment of doing the sequel to Halloween, Halloween 2. Yeah. And so Carpenter was gone. I basically had his original score to Halloween 1 as a multi-track. I transferred that from a 16-track to a 24-track, so I had open tracks. And I started to dub into the original Halloween score with my own synth work. And sort of that made the texture of Halloween go from a more simplistic to a more gothic, darker tonality. So there's the score to Halloween 2 still is one of my most popular things that get played like on the internet, on Spotify and all this other stuff. So Halloween 2 is very popular. And then at the very end of, I finished Halloween 2, Carpenter is finishing The Thing, and Ennio Morricone was his composer on The Thing, which was his hero. And, he did a good job, but there was a couple cues that Carpenter wanted that to just fill in, just supplementary. So we spent one afternoon where we did some extra cues for The Thing. You'll hear it's different. It sounds more like Christine. It's like droney stuff. It's incidental. It's not major stuff, but did work on The Thing with him. And then after he was done with The Thing came Halloween 3. And at that point, at the end of Halloween 2, Michael Myers was supposed to be dead. Right. Yeah. So the idea was let's go into a Halloween anthology. Let's go into Halloween stories. Hence Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, which that score also came out really good. It's again very popular. We keep revisiting that as great work in electronic music. I did a lot more participation then. Much more advanced sequencing. Each time you do it, your chops get better, your equipment gets better. So we continue to grow technically and also just musically. I remember sitting down to Halloween 3, and I said, "Well, what do you want to do, John?" And he says, "Hey, Alan, this is going to be really easy. We're just going to rip ourselves off," which was his saying, "I loved what we did on Escape from New York. Let's just keep doing it." Yeah. So we sat down, scored Halloween 3. Then John there's a short story on the movie The Thing, which today is, you know, recognized as one of the greatest monster movies, whatever. But at the time The Thing was released by Universal Pictures, they released E.T. at the same time. And so now here's E.T. on the cover of Time magazine. It's like, you know, the big rave, and his movie's coming out at the same time. So box office wise, and remember that was before VHS, if you didn't go to the theater and see it, it was considered a flop. He said, you know, they considered it a flop. It destroyed me. I wouldn't even get another movie. I had to hire out as a director for the movie Christine, just as director only on another guy's movie. Of course, he still did a great job. So I scored Christine with him. After that, I'm trying to think of the sequence of events. We went on to do the next movie after that was Big Trouble in Little China, I believe. And so I had now moved from my garage, my dining room studio, to a house. I bought a house, built a whole real studio with, you know, mixing boards and more synthesizers. This would be in like 83 to 84. And he comes in with Big Trouble. And now MIDI has been introduced. I've got more synthesizers. MIDI was a way to connect all the synthesizers in the room with a connection, so you could play one keyboard and 6 more would play at the same time. So the arrival of the MIDI capabilities, and now we had, you know, had finally digital samplers. I had emulators and Kurzweils that had sample stuff, so it wasn't just analog music anymore. It had samples in top. So the sound textures, I think, on Big Trouble in Little China are sort of the apex of our scoring together. That's really where the technology, and then the movie itself also allowed for a lot more variety in music because of the topic. So as opposed to a Halloween, which is all like in one house and one kind of thing, this one, you know, had a wide road. We had action, we had adventure, we had horror, we had heroism, we had romantic cues. So it was really a tour de force of the kinds of music that we could do. And I know when you hear John Carpenter's music, even today, he has a band with his son Cody and his godson Daniel. The music sounds like Big Trouble. I think that's where he and I arrived at what is now the palette of John Carpenter, the way he wants to sound. In addition, then they wanted to remake more Halloweens after Halloween 3. So I was approached to do the scores for Halloween, and John didn't want to do it. So I said, hey, do you mind if I do the rest of the sequels? He said, no, man, knock yourself out. So I went on and scored Halloween 3, 4, and 5 as sequels, ongoing from there. And in parallel, then I did 2 more movies with John Carpenter. One, The Prince of Darkness, and They Live. And They Live now becomes incredibly prophetic with the obey and you know, the aliens and the elites are in collusion, and they're keeping all the people locked out. And you know, there was very famous scene where Roddy Piper puts on the screens and he sees all the billboards and it says obey, sleep, etc. You know, and golly, I mean, that's what's happening today. We got cardboard cities in downtown LA. The world is flipped up on its ear. Couldn't have predicted COVID, but definitely they were there at the time in the movie. They were beaming a signal which kept everybody sort of asleep, and they couldn't see what's really going on. And to me, that's where we're at today. I mean, a lot of people are asleep. They don't see what's really going on. They don't see that there's a whole global agenda to take America down and create a one world government. And in order to do that, America's got to fall on its face so it can be economically joined into other places which aren't economically as strong. And I don't want to get too political, but it's happening. It's happening.
Good point there. Coming from where? From China, from Russia? Where you mean by one?
Well, it's not any one country. It's the elite owners, the multinational corporations.
Yeah.
Are in it. I mean, obviously the bad guys, visible bad guys, are George Soros and what's our guy, the Davos group, Klaus, whatever his name is, that's got the World Economic Forum. You know, they're all trying to get to a global currency, and obviously, you know, I mean, in the middle of all this craziness, Saudi Arabia and Russia agreed to get rid of the petrodollar. You don't have to buy. We had a lock on oil; had all be sold in dollars. Now that's been thrown out, so they can trade in rubles or gold or whatever they want. So they're cutting us out of the world economy, and then this whole I'll say it out loud. I think the whole thing that Biden did with Afghanistan is deliberate. I don't think he's looking like a buffoon, but I think he was told to do that so that China could get a hold of all the assets in Afghanistan, all the lithium for the batteries and stuff like that. And meanwhile, his son is invested in China, so they make money when this happens, and we're all left out of the equation. So it's bad news, but hey, we have to be adaptive. We have to keep going.
Yeah. Well, you touch a lot of stuff there. So let me start asking you questions. I mean, you told me a lot about your right. Like, so for people that don't know, right? Give me a good definition of a sound designer versus film composer. Right? At the beginning, when you began working with John Carpenter, you mentioned, well,
sure,
he hired to an assistant, and eventually, well, I can do that, but I can do that. You know, feel free to elaborate, not just with John Carpenter, but with other people that you have worked with. What would be a good definition of a sound designer, if you will?
Sure. So again, my first opportunity was to create sound effects.
Yeah.
And in the hierarchy of a film soundtrack, there's dialogue, music, and sound effects. Those are the three sort of committees. There's a supervising sound effects editor that does all the administration of the personnel. So there's dialogue editors, there's sound effects editors. And in the case of Star Trek, I became a sound effects specialist, which now is called a sound designer, but at the time I was called special sound effects. You know, if you know what ILM is, ILM makes special visual effects, right? They created shots of spaceships and monsters and all this other stuff that you couldn't shoot with a camera. It had to be done in a computer, and it's a special technique. So I sort of filled that chair as a sound effects person.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can't record the sound of the Enterprise. It's got to be created in those days, tape recorders and with synthesizers, and the tape recorders were called the samplers. There was no computers at the time. So the idea of pioneering these sound effects and creating a library for the sound effects editors to use in the movie was my role at the time. You know, because I had the equipment from making records and making music, and I was into synthesizers and all this other stuff. It turned out that my skill set suited what they needed as a vendor, as a person to make stuff for them. So that was really my role in early on, because there was still, you know, the movie was being cut on moviolas. I mean, it was 35 millimeter mag, and it was like sprockets, and they were like the Navy. They didn't have any new stuff. They just using the old battleship all over again. So I was like one of the new kids that showed up with some techniques and some opportunity. So that was really the focus. I mean, eventually I became a sound effects supervisor person. I did a movie called Army of Darkness, where I was the sound designer, sound editor guy, but mostly the sound design was creative sound effects. I would make library. The other resource for the sound effects editor was what they call Foley. So that was a place where you could set up a recording studio and record real sounds, you know, mechanical. You break things and you play with footsteps and all this other stuff. So sometimes I would use the output of a Foley stage as a place to record sound effects and bring it in, but I would also just record my own sound effects in the studio. I remember working on Raiders of the Lost Ark. Steve Flick gave me one scene, the Well of Souls. If you remember, that's where Indy falls down in the pit and the snakes are there and the statue falls over and there's a bunch of mummies. So I was making the sound effects for that. So in the case of the snakes, I was taking masking tape and on glass, and you know how a tape would sound if you pull it, go, right? That was one of the elements I used for the slithering of snakes, or the statue falling over and all the parts breaking. I would literally took bricks and rocks in the studio on the floor, and it would bust them off and record them on tape recorders. But I'd run the tape recorders as fast as they could run, and then slow the tape down. So it went from crack to crack to. So the slowing down of sound effects was a way to make big sounds. And actually the mummy sounds, when Marion calls on the dummy and pulls the first mummy down and there's a scream in the scene, that's actually my own voice. I did my Roger Waters inhale scream, which he does in a song called Careful with That Axe, Eugene, where he goes, inhale scream, and that's actually the sound in Raiders. So it's being creative. You know, I love pioneering. I love being the first kid on my block to play with something and have to figure out how to do it. And kind of once it's all figured out and it becomes mechanical or like a job, I'm looking for the next thing already. So that's just my personality. So, you know, Star Trek was a big thing. And then did a little bit on Raiders. Another one I did was Poltergeist at the same time. Same kind of situation. I'm with these same sound effects editors actually that I met on Star Trek. They're now doing Poltergeist. And I remember sitting in a room spotting sound effects, a spotting session. So you basically meet with the director and you make a list. Well, I need something here, and I need something here, and I need something there, and you're going to go back and create it. And in Poltergeist, there's this one scene where the little girl has now disappeared into another dimension. We don't see her anymore. And the parents are in the dining room kind of looking up going, because they're hearing her voice. So her character is only the voice. So what would that voice sound like? So I remember sitting in a room, and I've got Steven Spielberg, Michael Kahn, Frank Marshall. These are all, you know, like being with the Pope. I mean, they don't get any higher than that. And I talk to Steven, I go, well, Steven, what do you think about the effect on Carol Ann's voice? And he goes, Earth to Venus. I like pause for a second. Earth to Venus. Oh, that's great, man. And I write down Earth to Venus. I have no idea what he's talking about. It's like, I go out in the hall after the session and I start to sweat. I have no idea. Steven Spielberg just told me to do something and I don't know what he's talking about. Oh my God. If I get this right, I'll never work in this town again. So I went back to the studio, and remember, this is before computers and digital. This is just tape and synthesizers. And I keep trying stuff. In fact, I had one digital piece of equipment, Eventide harmonizer, but the pitch change wasn't working. It sounded digital. It wasn't organic. They had to sound real. So about 2 weeks later, I'm like I'm on the dime here. Like, where's this effect for Steven Spielberg? And I'm riding in the car, and on the radio comes this Led Zeppelin song called "Whole Lotta Love."
Yeah.
And there's two, you know, yeah, and in the song, there's two times when it breaks down to sort of a breakdown, and it goes what we'll call it psychedelic. And on Robert Plant's voice, there's a little pre-echo. So it goes, you need my love. And this idea of a pre-echo, something happening before you hear it, when, that's it, Earth to Venus, I got it, I know what he's talking about. So with that first Led Zeppelin inspiration, I went back to the studio and I took the sound of the tape of the girl's voice and I put it on the tape recorder backwards and I played it into reverb. So I had reverse reverb. So instead of mommy, it went, mommy.
Yeah.
You know, and then I did that in it was in quadraphonic. It was 4-channel Dolby. So I did 2 passes, and while it was being recorded, I had modified the tape recorder with a big vari-speed on it. So I was fooling with the speed on the tape while it was recording. So the reverb was a little coming through. So I had 2 tracks of mommy, and then I had the voice, and then one more pass to dump it out into the surround sound. So it became like a Doppler. They called it a Doppler effect. It sounded like he was flying through. And that became the sound, and I was saved. Earth to Venus, who knew? So you don't know where this stuff's going to come from. You just want to be alert. It comes to you. It comes to you. I mean, where does creative come from? Creative comes when you're feeding the cat or watering the lawn or driving in the car. You know, so the session is you prepared something, you bring it to the session, and you do it. I mean, now we're so spoiled that, you know, I live in a studio. So sort of getting out of the studio and going to Starbucks or something is sometimes you need that break. I remember having a discussion with Michael Kahn, again, the same picture editor. And he was just getting into this original, you know, the early days of Avid digital film editing and stuff like that. And I remember saying, you know, I like all this digital stuff, but you know what I'm missing is I'm missing the rewind time or the changeover time. So you would put something on, you'd work on it well, and then it would be a mechanical, you have to take the reel off, do the thing, put it back. And he says, that was my think time. I would think about things while I was doing that. Mm-hmm. And now with all this latest stuff, and it's even gotten crazier now, there's no rewind time. It's instant go, which I agree is more efficient when you know what you're doing. But when you're trying to be creative, you need the think time. You need the get away from. So I guess that's where I'm talking about. Where does the creativity come? Is often not in the studio, but someplace else when you're sort of stuck. What am I going to do here? And sometimes being just reflective. You've done something and you go away for a while, and then you come back an hour later after lunch, and you listen to it and you go, oh, I didn't hear that, or I didn't think about that, or how about I did last time I did this? It was I'll do a variation on it, and that's just sort of a keep working at it process. There's no set plan. I'll say there's not a formula, and if it is a formula, formulas don't appeal to me. So I'm always looking for some other way to do it.
But some people in general, right? Film composer, sound designer, sound editor, that kind of world have a hard time adapting to new technology, adapting to working with new directors. And some people have it, some people don't. And you have it. You're doing X, but you're going after Y. You didn't master Y. You're going after Z, and so on and so forth. You are ahead of the curve compared to most people. You are a goal-getter, and you are a smart guy, and you are satisfied with this, and you move on to the next thing, as opposed to some musicians that they did, I don't know, 5 hits, 30, 40 years ago, and they keep on doing the same thing, as opposed to release a new music, a new album, new film score, so we're working with new people, and you are able to adapt and create new things. People don't have that,
It's just a talent. I get, it's from drawing pictures. When you start with a blank piece of paper, you make it up, right? It's not a coloring book. A coloring book, you just already got an outline, you're just going to fill it in. So you start with a blank and you go for it. And I think also sort of this rock and roll, sort of, even when I had the original band was Braino, and then it became Pie Corporation. We were into jamming. And I always talk about the jam box, where somehow, you could have now you can do it, but at the time, some way to say, let's all go to C, and then we'll go to D minor, and then we'll go to E, and so you could shout it out, and then just jam on that note for a while. So the idea of improvisation has always been a thread for me. Hence, when I got to the jazz stuff, I watched, Weather Report for 300 shows, and there was no 2 shows that were the same. They had a rough structure. Here's how we get in, then we do solos, and then we have a outro, and it was different. And just having all that improvisation, observation, watching. I mean, look, we're talking about Joe Zawinul, we're talking about Wayne Shorter, we're talking about Jaco Pastorius, the greatest musicians in that genre at the time, and just the best in the world. So to be around world-class people and have observed that, of course, I took it all in. It's part of my beingness now. And even with John Carpenter, those scores were never written. They were improvised.
My God.
I mean, a couple of times John would have a theme, right? Dun 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 dun, or like Escape from New York. Ba, da, 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 da. He was a master at themes. And in fact, I remember in the beginning thinking, golly, these themes are so simple. I mean, as a musician, it's like, it's nothing. I mean, it's on one note. He plays a C note for 3 minutes, and it's just this circle. Whoa, whoa. Musically, they were the antithesis of complicated, but they worked. And also watching him make music for his own movie, there was a couple philosophies that he shared with me, which I share. Like, to John Carpenter, he gave me this quote. He says, "Alan, for a director, music is the director's velvet glove," which he was saying it's a way to touch people without knowing they're being touched.
Right.
So in this scene, it's being acted. The music tells the audience how to respond. We're excited, we're scared, we're feeling empathy for the character, and that was his interpretation of how music works in a movie. He would often say that music was like the carpeting. It's the thing you just puts the floor of everything is built on it. And he also said that, you let the actors act. You don't get in the way. It's all about the acting. And now when nobody's acting, you want to make music to go from point A to point B to point C, or like in the case of a horror movie, you've got somebody just going, not saying anything. So the music has to say, "Oh my God, something terrible is happening right now." So I'm grateful for him for everything that he shared with me and the experience. I actually went to the school of John Carpenter for one person. I sat in a room with him for over 8 years.
That's right. Yeah.
Watching him do his thing and sharing in that stuff and contributing. And, you know, here I am, golly, think about it. It's like 35, 40 years later, still doing it. Well, what a blessing to be an older person now. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm 73 years old, but I'm not done.
No, of course not.
I'm not retiring. I'm going to the last second.
Of course.
I mean, my vision is, you know, I'll feel like it's going to be over. I'll put the machine in record and I'll just fall on the keyboard and that'll be my last chord. I mean, that's what my vision, you know.
Well, was your wife knew what she was getting into when she married you and the Halloween and Michael Myers and all the horror stuff?
No. But we both loved Halloween anyhow. You know, even when when we first had kids, you know, we were the Halloween house in the neighborhood. I put dry ice and ghosts out in the bushes, and I'd play music play the music, you know, to ambience, and we'd always have 200 or 300 kids. I mean, we just loved Halloween anyhow. So that become an iconic part of the career. Yeah. Who knew? But it all matched up. Yeah, you know, and it's such a blessing. I mean, here we go in October again, and now they're making more Halloweens.
That's right. You know?
So it's revived the whole interest in the characters and the franchise, and you know, my music's playing 24/7 in October every year. I mean, I'm making money while I sleep. How can I complain about that, right?
Of course, yeah. So when working with a filmmaker for the first time, do you typically prefer to see like a rough cut before signing into the project, or how? Yeah.
I mean,
how that work? I mean, if I hire you to do sure, I'll explain that. I send you the script and it's going to be John, Peter, Mary acting. It's going to be like a science fiction, whatever that means. How you know if it's a good suit for you to compose music for that kind of stuff?
Well, obviously John Carpenter already had the movies, so he would show up with a movie already cut, and it was John Carpenter. I was in, but right. Working with other directors, they don't even start thinking about the music till the movie's been shot and it's in editing. So you're a post-production person. Gotcha. And so usually there's a version of the movie. It may not be locked yet, but you know, there's a movie that's been shot and you can watch the movie. And for me, the first time I watch the movie is the last time I can be in the audience. Because from then on, I'm going to pick the thing apart, right? I'm going to go scene by scene and cut by cut. So, but I just kind of sit back and get the essence of the movie. And because of I'll say my catalog, what I've done in the past, people have come to me to ask me to do what I've done before again. Good. You know, it would be to ask me to imitate John Williams or Jerry Goldsmith. I'm not the right guy. You know, they wouldn't come to me for that. So it's a movie that's already been, they know what I've done and they've come to me for do more of what you've already done. And interesting enough, the last two movies I did, a movie called Hoax, and I've got one coming out shortly called Cosmic Dawn. The directors came in and they said, I want you to use only analog synthesizers. I want you to do what you used to do. Good. And in fact, even saying, I don't want any digital sampling. I don't, you know, there's computers involved, obviously, but the idea is to imitate what was the old days, which has a revival. I was just interviewed. It's funny. I was just interviewed for a movie about 1982. And the postulate is, some of the greatest movies ever made all happened in 1982. There was this apex, The Thing, Halloween 3, E.T., Gandhi. All these movies were made in 1982. It was just for some reason they got it right. So this is a retrospect on what did they do and what were they thinking about? Where did all this come from? So very interesting that there's a retro going back to revisiting that stuff and sort of picking it apart and figuring out what made that work. Why did that work? Why was it successful? So
what do you think? Why 1982? What do you, looking back now, I don't know, 40 years later, what's your opinion?
I think it was kind of timing. There was these young directors, the John Carpenters, the Steven Spielbergs, the Robert Zemeckis, other people who had done independent movies, you know, low budget stuff, and they were successful. So the people that ran the big studio said, let's get those guys in here. Let's see what they can do. So it just worked out that way. I mean, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, it's one of the better Star Treks, right? The Star Trek I was Robert Wise, Sound of Music, Day of the Station, Roddenberry, and it was kind of messed up. It didn't have its grounding. So now they turn to a new director, Nick, and he hired James Honer, and they codified it. They gave it story. They made something out of it. So I think that's part of why it happened. And and here Spielberg's got this idea of, instead of having a scary monster, we have the friendly monster, E.T. It was very appealing. It was very appealing. And then you look at The Thing, which wasn't a box office hit, but it took VHS for The Thing to get rediscovered on videotape, and people going, oh my God, that's a great movie. Da, 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 da. And Alien was made at around that time. So there was a lot of great, what do they call it? Confluence. Things just happened to come together at that time, and were empowered by the studios with larger budgets to go out and really make the big versions of the stuff.
Got you. So, in terms of, I don't mean to ask you, the money that you make, but in terms of, they hire you they pay you X amount of dollar for a film score or help on the particular project. And then, but in some other cases, like you mentioned Halloween, you get like a percentage every time that is a record sale, or is playing on the radio, or in parties, that kind of stuff. You guys, that's so it's big. Yeah.
Sure. So
royalties, if you will, or
when you get hired,
yeah,
the money is being put up by the production company, the producers of the studio. You get your writer's share of the composition. So you created intellectual property.
right.
And for every residual dollar of a piece of music, it's 50-50. 50% goes to the writers and 50% goes to the publishers. And in America, the publishers control what happens to the movie or to the music.
Yeah.
So the movie studio retains the publishing. I'm the writer, or in the case of work with John Carpenter and I are the writers. But then the publishing is controls what happens to the music and what happens to the soundtrack album, et cetera, et cetera. So I do get a residual as the writer, but there's a certain percentage. The other 50% goes to the publishing. Now, in the case of John Carpenter, he would retain some of the publishing because he was John Carpenter. So he'd like split it with the studio or whatever. Each one was a different deal.
Yeah.
But basically, you're doing it as a work for hire. They own the music, and it belongs to them forever as part of the movie. Now, currently, again, I'm in a different position. Often, I've got young people coming with, they don't really have the money. So I'll make a negotiation where I'll own the music instead. I can cut the price because I'm going to now have the soundtrack album rights and what else I can exploit from the movie music, the soundtrack, after the movie comes out. So a lot of my deals now are more favorable to me, but the budgets have come way down. They just don't have the money they used to. A lot of them are independents. I recognize a young person and their talent, and I'm willing to work with them. So in some ways, I underwrite the film by agreeing to be participant for it for less than what would be the normal fee, but for retaining ownership, and then the Spotify and the soundtrack album and all this stuff are mine, and it's up to me to make money with those things independently.
I got you. In the late 70s, there were so many progressive bands in Italy, and then at that time, many directors in Italy were doing, horror movies and sound effect and electronic music, and that was going on independent of what was going on in the United States in the early 80s, right? There were many
Sure. Yeah, the one
Ennio Morricone might be one, but there are many hundreds in Italy in the area of electronic music, and and so
the one band that comes up is Goblin.
Goblin is right. Yeah.
I mean, they're again, they've gone through various configurations, but still, Goblin, some version of Goblin goes out and plays because that movie the music lives on. It's interesting because, like Escape from New York, back to Escape from New York, when it came to make a soundtrack album for Escape from New York, I went to John and I said, hey, John, they want to make a soundtrack out of the movie. He goes, really? You think somebody wants to listen to that? I'm going, yeah, it's good music. So he said, okay, well, go for it. It wasn't not intended to be an album, but when I make the soundtrack albums, I put them in the order of the way it happened in the movie, right? So, you know, the first cut is the opening of the movie. It's like watching the movie, but only in sound, because to me, that's the storytelling. You know, that's the way the movie progresses. Whereas if you were in the record business, you'd pick out the best piece of music and put it the first cut, because that would be the first one you'd hear on the record, and you'd have your single and stuff like that. So it's a different thing. You know, back to like a Pink Floyd or a Moody Blues or a Genesis. These were concept albums. You went from the beginning to the end. It wasn't that you're going to listen to 3 minutes. You were going to listen to the whole thing. So that I've impinged that on any way I make soundtrack records, and especially now that everything's instantaneous and digital downloads from iTunes or whatever, you can cut 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever and see what's popular and sort that out later. But for me, the idea was the LP was something you put the needle on and it played for 25 minutes and you listened, you know, and you relaxed and you went on a mind thing. You went on the journey, like a concert. So that was embedded in me. I was never a 3-minute guy.
Okay. What about the other question is probably, of course, you know, Bernard Herrmann and Popol Vuh did compose, Popol Vuh composed most of the music for some of the Bernard Herrmann movie in Germany in the 70s and 80s. They're unbelievable, you know, people as well. You know, I don't know if you know them, but I really like the music.
Well, back to European stuff. I mean, obviously my big heroes were Tangerine Dream and Vangelis. They were the best. Yeah. You know, Carpenter and I would listen to Tangerine Dream records to hear what the latest electronic music stuff was for inspiration. Klaus Schulze was another guy that was really on it. Kraftwerk, you know, were iconic. And then, you know, obviously the whole English scene, you know, all those bands that we mentioned. And it was different then. It's just different then than it is now. I've had some working in video games now, you know, but again, they come for me to do music like I already do, not to reinvent myself, you know, because if we're in reinvention, then some kid's got his college roommate that's doing it and they're all happy because they're into contemporary music, whatever those genres are, you know, the whole urban scene, the whole rap scene. I did work with Dr. Dre. I worked with Snoop Dogg. I worked with Warren G on their music videos. That was in the late 90s. So I've done music videos, but for their music videos, a lot of times they would have like a little 30-second before the tune starts, little piece of a movie. So I'd be in to score that little bit of movie and sound effects before the music video started. So it's been fun.
Yeah.
One thing that I did recently, it's like the last 5 years, I worked with a company called Magic Leap. And actually, I have it right here. Just hold on 1 second.
My God, man.
All right, so check this out.
Yeah.
This is called Magic Leap.
Yeah.
And this is like goggles, you wear it, right?
Yeah.
And the imaging is actually a laser projection right to your retina. So you don't look into a lens. And the compositing of a holographic image and the real world, you still see what you're doing. It's like having sunglasses on, they're dimmed a little bit, but you still see the room. There's holograms that are projected into the room with you. So this could have been a projected, and all these things have sound to go with it, right? And there's two little speakers, two little iPhone speakers in the, so put it there.
On the side,
right yeah, right in here. So they're like right at your sideburns. So the idea is you don't want to put headphones on and block the real world. You want to participate in the real world that you're in, but now have an augmented reality or a mixed reality of holograms in the room with you. So this was really a lot of fun, and it's ongoing. You'll see this stuff happening now. Google's got some glass. The Google Glasses was the first version of it that got a little weird. This is like a much more sophisticated version. Apple's going to have augmented reality. So this whole idea of the movie being in the room with you instead of up on the screen, I'm super excited. Back to the pioneering. This is really a lot of fun. So I'm going to be doing stuff with that. And the spatialization of the sound. So if this bottle here is making noises, right, and I turn my head, it's going to pan differently, right? It's going to sound differently. The direction and the volume is going to change. Well, all that calculation for the sounds of the holographic objects are done on the fly. So all the panning and all the spatialization is done, and this whole idea of head-related transfer function, like why do you think something's over there? Well, the volume to this ear is louder, and you hear space on this side, and you by experience in the real world, you've got this database of where things are based on what it sounds like. And this plays into that whole feature. So there's all this high level computing that goes with it. And it's another opportunity. What are you going to do with this thing? I mean, it's wide open. You can play games for sure. Yeah. You can experience things. I've proposed the idea of what I call sonic visualizers, where you can play a music track and have them, like, remember the old color organ where the colors would change? Well, think of that on a super steroid version where you could be sitting, let's make it up, make scenario. Let's say that I have cancer and I'm sitting in my hospital bed getting chemo. Yeah. I put these things on and it takes me out of there. I go to the beach in Hawaii and I experience birds while I'm having this thing that's not so nice, but I escape with this stuff. I create these environments, these experiences, or the idea of making digital people, digital characters. Like, let's say that I'm in a nursing home and now my digital wife is in the chair next to me talking to me about how it was when we first got married. It becomes a digital memory. I mean, it's wide open. It's wide open. It's totally the space to pioneer in.
Are you scared? I don't know if scared is the correct word, but I'm a computer engineer, right? I make a living working as a software developer, but the world that we're going into with AI and so many technologies that we have access, that it's going to be difficult now to,
Yeah, I'll go with the word scared. There's a scary part of this. That's who's running the show. Where's it coming from? Do we give control over to the machines, and how do we keep the people involved? Or do the people become like the machine becomes God and we all bow down to whatever the machine says? They make movies about this for years, right? This is all coming to a reality moment of personal choice, right? Have you seen some of these, Boston Robotics has these robots that they can jump and spin and play football and win and stuff like that. The condensing of what a person does into a program. This is the artificial intelligence, and now the AI itself can teach itself, and it can become a lot smarter than a person. Absolutely. So absolutely, these are challenges. These are challenges. It becomes a responsibility.
It reminds me of the first time I saw, Blade Runners and the replicas, right? That was 1982, I think. And now 40 years later, we've been going into that direction, and eventually will be, controlled by machine or whatever. And I don't know if that will be the end of the civilization, but we need to, like Elon Musk, suggested a couple of years ago, we need to start putting guidelines around it, because otherwise we are doomed. I mean, we are going to be controlled by machine. It's very different to have robots working in building car of a temperature of 300 degrees, or exploring Mars, or exploring, other terrains, or going inside a volcano, but, controlling us. Or in Japan, I don't know if you've been in talking about, there are robots everywhere, and they can bring you a coffee instead of a real person. It makes me, I'm scared a little bit, to say the truth, man.
It's all gonna happen. So it's now a matter of responsibility. I mean, look, let's face it, just to quickly cut to the chase, this whole idea of Sexbots, having a doll that's your wife that gives you sex all the time.
Great.
You don't think they're going to have that in China for all these single men?
Of course.
Come on. Of course they are.
Yeah.
And it distorts humanity if it goes that far. So these are challenges. You know, you and I, we'll see it happen, but our kids are the ones who are going to have to manage what they do with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, one hand, you want technology to improve, help, you know, allow you to do things that you couldn't do before. But at times, I want to go back to old school. Like a good example will be, you know, we talk about, you know, analog gear that you have a lot, and it's up to you when you develop a new movie or working with a new director or a filmmaker and say, well, I want you to go back to analog stuff, you know, no that's new synthesizer. It's up to you, or can you make a recommendation about the equipment that you want to use when you record new music?
Well, sometimes I have a free hand. Just knock me out. You know, give me your best stuff. Other times they, like I said, these couple guys said they're making a movie that's sort of an homage to that older film style, and so they want the soundtrack to be decorated in the same way that the movies were decorated in the early 80s. Because again, they're saying that was really the good stuff. I want to make something that sounds like that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and whereas, you know, especially in the world of just about music and the whole world of EDM, you know what that is, electronic dance music. There's all these amazing electronic tones. I just listened to it. Wow, that's new, that's fresh. I really like that. But it's not right for this movie. Because the soundtrack, again, back to Carpenter, is supposed to be in the background. If the soundtrack starts to take over the movie, it's not doing its job. The whole thing is it's supposed to take you on this ride for an hour and a half of watching what happens to these characters and all these scenes and their reaction, and you know, tell a story to the end where there's an ending and you're satisfied with that experience, whatever that was. And you can be left happy, you can be left sad, you can be left excited, you can feel in love, you can wish this never happened, whatever, but there's some response to watching this movie if it's a good movie. And
I think you got frozen for a minute. Resume the recording, yeah. So, okay, so you need to, you know, according to the director, want to use, and whatever the film, the best tool for the job, if you will, right?
Yeah, and certainly I can make an orchestral sounding score if that's what they want, because, you know, I have entire orchestras in digital samples.
That's right, yeah.
Recorded perfectly. We were talking. It was funny. We were talking the other day about drum sounds, and now, you know, in especially in the record business, you'd spend all day in the studio getting the right drum sound from real drums.
Yeah.
Well, now people have done that, made those recordings, and it's just a sample on a keyboard.
Right.
So, you know, I can have the drum set from Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd or the Beatles, and have those exact sounds. I mean, they're in libraries. They're available as you know. Think of every instrument as a palette. I mean, it used to be that there was 1,000 colors in my palette. Now there's 1,000,000 colors in my palette. So a little anecdote. I had lunch with Brian Eno. You know who Brian Eno is?
Of course.
Yeah. So I was in, and so a hero of mine. And so I was very fortunate. I get to have lunch with him one time. We were just talking about production and whatever. And obviously, to me, he's up from me. I'm listening. I'm not offering much. And got to talking about how when he produces records for these bands now, what does he do? And he says, the first thing I do is we establish what palette of instruments we're going to be using for this record. It's either real drums or drum machines, it's synthesizers, it's digital. He says, I want to frame it and restrict the album to be made with only these tools. Because when you have the restriction, which was the old days, we had restrictions, right? You didn't have all this stuff. If you restrict it, it makes you get more out of what you got. Instead of having this universal possibilities and try this and try this and try this. He says it makes a much better record. So that's another thing that happened from this earlier days. was there were technical and resource restrictions, so it made the artist get more out of what he had instead of just having everything. And I take that in. That's something to consider for how.
And we're talking about what's the last thing we're talking about? Analog gear, right? And then
yeah, we talked a little about analog gear. I told the story of making records.
Yeah, the
and
palette,
then,
right? Brian,
and then just talking a little bit about how, you know, analog gear is what is. Orchestra is still orchestra, and the composers that write for orchestra, you know, the Jerry Goldsmiths and the John Williams are they're the Mozarts and the Beethovens and the Handels of modern times. I mean, film has kept the orchestra alive.
Yeah,
really, in many ways, film music is the one application of orchestra that breathed life and commerce and a business into it rather than just concerts. So
yeah, I got you. Looking back in, you know, in your films and the one you have seen in your life, is two questions. What the one that you are most proud of, not necessarily have given you more money, but, and the same question is a film score that is not yours, that you look back and say, man, maybe the movie's great, maybe the movie's not that great, but from a film score point of view, that's the best thing ever done. Is any one of those that you?
Yeah, actually, there's one soundtrack that'll be released soon. Yeah, it's in the queue. The movie was called Basement Jack.
Yeah,
it's a horror movie. I did this in probably 2007, 8. But they gave me a free hand, just knock yourself out. And I was a tour de force of horror movie music, done my way. And when I play that record back, I go, wow, that's really good. I really did a good job on that. There's also some other ones. I actually work with this company, and I've been putting out Alan Howarth Collections, which is just what you're talking about. Movies that I did good music for, but the movie was like, you never heard of it or didn't get popular.
Yeah.
So there's one called Headless Horseman that's really good. Another one called Evilution, which is the same producers as Basement Jack. And then these two I just recently did, Hoax. You should check that out. That's available now. Yep. And up and coming, this one, Cosmic Dawn.
Yeah.
Another one that was really a chance to go out there. It hasn't been released yet. So when people watch this, let's talk about sort of 2022. It'll be out there. Cosmic Dawn. Really, really a good movie. It was great because it's the storyline is that there's a young girl, main character, who's now a teenager, and her in the opening scene, we see that her mother has been abducted by aliens. They're out camping and the ship comes and the mom's gone. So then we cut to her being a teenager. She's being raised by her aunt, and they want to say that her mother died, and she's going, no, my mother was taken. So she's been in therapy and drugs and all kinds of stuff trying to get her over this, and she insists it's real. And she runs into this, what we'll call a cult of other people who have had alien encounters. And she finds a home amongst these people and support. And so now her family thinks she's been abducted by these crazy cult out in the woods and all this other stuff. But in the end of the movie, the ship shows up and takes them all away. So it works. It's a production out of Toronto, actually, but done well. And again, the director just kind of said, do your thing, Alan, show me what you got. So I gave him everything I had.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, the other part of the question, something that you have not produced at all, you have not been involved, and you say, man, I wish I have done that or worked with that director, because that's one of the best things in the world, if you will.
Well, certainly the Christopher Nolan stuff, like this, was it Inception?
Yeah, Inception. That's unbelievable. Yeah.
What a great movie! What a great movie! You know, wish I was Hans Zimmer at that time. He really did a great job with that. It's the filmic opportunity. You know, the movie takes you someplace and you get to take the audience on a musical journey that the movie put you on. So that something like that's very successful. I enjoy those. Gladiator was another one, another great score. You know, so a good movie is a good movie. You know, and certainly back to Hans Zimmer. Just let's have a quickie on him. So a great musician, obviously has a long history, but he is enough of a businessman that he built a whole group of young, up-and-coming composers that are on staff. I mean, he's got like 12 guys that are there all the time. So he created a machine, a business, where you as a Hollywood director could come to him into his studio on Monday, and 2 weeks later, he could give you a full score. Why? Because he spread it out amongst 12 other guys. Each guy had their specialty, and they assemble it, and there's your score. Whereas for me to do that as one person, it's very linear. I mean, it take me six weeks, 10 weeks to do what he did in 2 weeks. So in some ways, I hated him. Like, man, you're not doing your own stuff. And I realized, no. He recognized the need in Hollywood for fast turnaround and quick results. And so that's why he gets that business. He's the guy. So he created a whole studio film score production thing where and different than a John Williams or a James Horner or orchestra guys that write it all out. It's all written out. And then there's a session where you hire the orchestra for 2 or 3 days and you create it and it just boom, it comes out. No, he's doing what I'm doing, but at a mega level with lots of hands-on people. So I recognize it, and he does great work.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned before the alien encounter. What's your take? And there's a professor here, who used to be a professor at Temple University in Pennsylvania. I forgot his name. He has done a lot of research in that area. I don't know if you believe or not, but I got to ask you that.
I've seen ships. I've seen ships. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Interesting. The one other trajectory that we can start on. There was this book I got called The Rods of Amun-Ra, and it was written by a fellow named Wesley H. Bateman. He spent 25 years analyzing the Great Pyramid of Giza mathematically like an architect. And his postulate was that whoever designed the Great Pyramid as the designer must have had units of measure, because you don't just build it, right? You got to say it's going to be this long and whatever, and it's all within very precise measurements. And he felt that the architect had a mathematical message that's communicated in the architecture. And he analyzed it for how long everything was and da-da-da-da. And he never went there, but he read every book on everybody who ever managed to measure the pyramid. And he figured he had it down to like 1/10 of an inch. He knew exactly what it was. And so from that, he derived the mathematics of the Great Pyramid's architect. And because it was called Ra, the rods of Amun-Ra, the units of measure of Ra, he called it Ra mathematics. Well, the boil down of the mathematics of the Great Pyramid reflects 2 ratios that we consider irrational. Phi, the golden mean, 1.1618, and this ratio never ends. It goes on forever. Hence, they're irrational. They can't be resolved. And pi, which is pi r squared, the ratio of a diameter of a circle. And so in geometry, you can define these ratios, but mathematically, you can't resolve them. Well, his idea was, rather than being irrational, if it's irrational and they go on forever, aren't they infinite? Aren't they infinite numbers? And maybe these numbers come from infinity, the designers of the experience we're having called the third dimension. So he explored this whole other thing, wrote books about it. I read this whole thing about pi and phi and the ratios, et cetera, et cetera. And if you remember, I even had a band called Pi Corporation. I was fascinated by pi since the 7th grade, since I learned about this stuff. So it resonated with me. And at the end of the book, he said there was acoustic frequencies defined by the pyramid. And I went, what? I got to know this. So I got his number and rang him up. Hey, Wes, I just read your books, found all this stuff. I want to talk to you about it. Well, one, he was thrilled somebody actually read the books, 800 pages of data. and got it and wanted to expand on his own research.
Right.
So eventually, after phone conversation, I went out and I sat in his dining room, and he had a bench oscillator, you know, like just a tuner, but very precise, out to like 6 decimal points. And his math gave resolution to like 6 decimal points on frequencies. And I sat there and I had a little Elisa's keyboard, a little electric keyboard, so I could fool with the tuning electronically. Put up the first note. He said, this is one of the notes, the A notes, that's close to A440, but this one is a variation of A440, A423.997, roughly 424 cycles. So I'm sitting there and it's going boop, and I take the keyboard and I detune the keyboard until I flat. It's going to be flat now, you know, whatever. Turns out that it's 64 cents flat from A440 to make A432 on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And I start to play the keyboard for a while. And I kind of look over and I go, man, this sounds like an 18th century piano. I don't know why I said that. I mean, I kind of was thinking of like when I was in college, there were pianos that were out of tune and stuff like that, and they were flat. He says, you're right. I'm like, what do you mean I'm right? And he goes, this tuning from the pyramid is the same tuning as the first tuning fork that was invented in the year 1711 by John Shore, the royal cornetist. So here's somebody in 1711 making the first tuning fork to make tunings, and he chooses actually A423.5, very close to what we're talking about. And that became the standard for the court, and the whole court tuned it. And I did research in the Renaissance, the tuning forks of Mozart and Handel and these other people were all in this 420 some cycle. In fact, the range is 421 to 427. And eventually they got to A432 later in Paris, about 100 years later. But anyhow, all the tunings of all the instruments and the music was in this other range that he says is in the pyramid. So I go, wow, this is cool. So I tell this story to another colleague of mine, a fellow named Dr. J.J. Hertak. He's a double PhD, and he's the author of a book called The Keys of Enoch. And he has an organization called the Academy for Future Science. I tell him the story. He goes, Alan, you're onto something. Let's prove it. So he gets a sponsor, and first we go to the Mayan Yucatan, and I measure the acoustic resonance of over 200 Mayan temple rooms or spaces. And the technique is you play pink noise, which is all frequencies at once at the same equal. It sounds like steam going. Psh. You play the sound into the room and you make a recording of the pink noise, having been reshaped frequency-wise by the room for resonance. You do this in recording studios all the time to flatten out a room. Well, in this case, I wanted to see the unflat part of these ancient architecture, these sacred spaces. And over 200 of the out of the database, and this is a scientific paper, it's been published, a white paper in archaeological. This goes to an area called archaeoacoustics, the acoustics of archaeology. And the tuning of the Mayan rooms turns out to be, the resonant frequency is 216 cycles, which was 1 octave low of 432. So this 432 actually has a basis in Mayan architecture. The retuning music to 432, it was deliberate. The units of measure of the Mayans made 432 resonance or 216 resonant frequencies. So with that success, we actually got a sponsor, and I went into Egypt and we rented the Great Pyramid privately for 2 hours. Got the pyramid to ourselves, and I did all the measurements acoustically of the Great Pyramid. And the resonance of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid is this 424 business that Bateman talked about in the book.
My God, man.
How could this be? What's going on? How did he even know? Well, the answer is because he had precise measurements, he could predict the wavelengths that would resonate in a room of that dimension. So I'm going, oh my God, this guy, this is real. Well, it turns out that pi and phi are the ratios, call it God's math. This has been used as a constant in designing the third dimension that we experience. So if you look at your hand and you look at your finger and you call this length of your finger as 1 unit, the next bone is 1.618 times longer, or 5 phi times longer. 1.618 again. If you do this, you see a snail shell. This is called the Fibonacci stuff.
That's right.
So all the physical parts of all living things physically are on the golden mean. It's 432. When you see a beautiful face, not that I'm beautiful, but when you have the ratios of the distance between the eyes and the nose and the mouth, all perfect, we see that as beauty. That's aesthetics. So there's mathematics in beauty, and certainly in music. Now, what about this 424 business? I was going to these sound healing conferences and telling them this story and playing music retuned, basically pitched down to the frequencies of the 432, and then also of this stuff. Well, in the book of that was Bateman's pyramid book, he gave 9 variations of pi, which the middle, the one he showed me, the 424, was sort of the average frequency, but he was showing frequencies from 421 to 427 with nine increments in it. And I showed this at a sound healing conference in San Francisco. A couple of weeks later, I get a call from Dr. Alan Sheets from NASA. And he goes, Alan, I heard about your frequencies. We need to talk. Okay, I meet with Dr. Alan Sheets. He's got an organization called the organization is called New Equations, and he's associated with the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is Edgar Mitchell and all that stuff up in San Francisco.
Yep.
And he says, in our school, New Equations, we teach 9 soul types. Where'd you hear about that? He says, well, we studied Egyptian culture, and there's this book called The Temple of Man by Schwaller de Leibitz. He was like the most famous French Egyptologist. And in there, he says that the Egyptians claimed that there was 9 soul types. And it was important to know what type of soul you have to optimize your life. So that's what they teach. Okay. So he says, you got 9 frequencies. I got 9 soul types. I wonder if they coordinate. I wonder if there's a correlation. So I gave him the chart of how to retune the music. I made a whole bunch of music, retuned to all different nine subtle frequencies, basically from 421 to 427. He tested them. He goes, hey, Alan, it works. Those frequencies are the resonance of the souls. And he said, if you want to think about it, we identify soul types by the chakras. So right now we have 7 chakras, of which the heart is the center. In the math, they also have 2 more sub-chakras. They got another one here at the thyroid and another one at the small of the back. So they now use these tunings for an initiate to their school. They take a piece of music and they play it 9 times with all the subtle tunings, and they ask the student, which one sounded right to you? And he goes, oh, well, the 3rd one or the 4th one or the last one. And that's their first discovery of what is their soul type or their resonance. Wow. So it turns out you can now tune music to the chakras. So if you want to tune love music, which the most powerful is the heart, and it turns out my soul type is the heart. I am a 424 person, and Bateman actually showed me 424 in the beginning, and I've been running with it as the one that seemed right, because I picked it, one, because it sounded right to me, it turns out, but it was also the middle, sort of the average one. So, you know, I couldn't get too deep into this whole thing for somebody, so I'd show them the 424 stuff. So an interesting sidebar, now that we can tune to the chakras, as an artist, well, if you wanted to do religious music, you should tune to the crown. If you want to do a sing-along, you should tune to the throat. If you want to do something looking into the future, you should tune to the 3rd eye. If you want to do a love song, tune to the heart. If you want to dance, tune to the root chakra. So this is a whole evangelism that I've got. I've got a website up called naturalresonance.net. Still work in progress, but I'm working on some software for your cell phone so you could retune the music on your phone to these other tunings for your own personal experience. But here's the funny part. I treated this whole research and everything very sacred, very holy, very, important. And this movie score I talked about, Basement Jack, I thought, I'm going to try this tuning on a film score for a horror movie. So I retuned the score to the heart, because I'm figuring that, when you're scared, you feel it in your heart, right?
Yeah.
I got an award for the scariest music that year. So the secret sauce of the tuning is in this film score for Basement Jack. So what happens is the tuning of the music amplifies the resonance to the artist. So all the music on the radio is tuned to 440. So that's not part of this stuff. It's outside of the realm of the stuff. In fact, it's a bit off. And this was a standard that was agreed upon in 1925 by NAM, the National Association of Music Workshops, for the purpose of defining what be the tuning of tuning forks. So all tuning forks are to 440, all pianos are made to 440, all trumpets are 440, and we're all in tune. The whole band's in tune with itself. But it's to the wrong frequency if you go for my philosophy or my viewpoint. So what it does, it's like a tool. Like my analogy is like a hammer. You can have a hammer and you can build a house, or I can hit somebody with a hoe over the head and kill them. It's a tool. So this is now a musical tool for getting a response from the audience, from the listeners. That's a new palette. It's a new way to work with sound and frequency. So here's an interesting subset of all this stuff. So on Star Trek 4, if you remember, there was whales in the Star Trek movie. And so I actually met with Leonard Nimoy, and he wanted me to make a signal that related to whales, because in the beginning of the movie, there's this broadcast coming from this giant space log that's coming in, and it's broadcasting something. And in the storyline in the movie is that the space log is looking for whales. It's come back to Earth to talk to the whales. And in the future, the whales are extinct. So it's got nobody to talk to. It's getting mad. Where are the whales? Where are the whales? But so I was going to make something using whale songs. So there was this very famous record from the 60s called The Songs of the Humpback Whales. And the recordist was this guy, Roger Payne. And so, because I'm Star Trek, I get Roger Payne's number and I call him up. Hey, Roger, this is Alan Howarth. I'm working on Star Trek. I want to use your whale songs. Oh, man, go for it. And of course, I'm pushing because this is from the 60s. I go, what else you got? You know? He goes, Alan, it's a sad story. What? He says, the whales don't sing like that anymore. What? He says, because of the noise pollution that's now in the ocean, for centuries, the bull whale would sing his song. It would travel for hundreds of miles. The other herds would learn the song and replicate it. This would be the loss of the indigenous whale songs. So they don't sing like that anymore. And they still sing, but they're making up new stuff. They're like the next generation. So, wow. So now I got my emulator keyboard, and I'm putting the whale songs into the keyboard, and I put the whale at the lowest frequency, and because I'm making like a signal out of it, I speed the song of the whale up like 4 octaves. So instead of going, it goes, it sounds just like birds. What? So now I take some bird songs and I put them in the sampler and I slow them down. And they sound just like whales. And I had this moment, sort of like an epiphany, this like, oh my God, there is a God. This is all by design. None of this is accidents. And the crazy part is the tunings of the whales and the birds are A432.
My God, man.
I mean, like, this is all real. This is all planned. What people do, whatever they're going to do, and society is something, but nature and the planet and all of this creation has been made by a master mind of God intelligence put here for us to experience, hence children of God. And God's kind of like sitting back like, oh, what are you going to do with this? This is free will. You're going to love what I did, or you're going to hate what I did? You're going to blow it up, or you're going to like get in tune with the planet and whatever. And we're at that moment as humanity. We're at that moment. It's very interesting.
Are you very, very, very fascinated all the time you tell me? Are you aware of the Monroe Institute?
Yes, the hemisync.
The hemisync.
Yeah, actually, yeah, all that stuff works. The idea of tuning the brain, tuning the mind as a receiver of information, hence why people meditate. In fact, Bateman did a lot of experiments with the guy that wrote the book. He measured the brain waves of people that could meditate, And it turns out that the meditating state is an alpha brainwave at 10.5 cycles. So he measured the brainwaves of people when they meditated. And the 10.5 is some of the planetary harmonics. So are you familiar with a thing called the Schumann resonance?
Yeah.
All right, so Schumann is 7.8.
7.8, yeah.
But this, we could sit down with a calculator and figure out what this is. It's probably a fifth. It's the natural fifth above 7.8. But very, very interesting. I did this for somebody the other day. I have to turn my phone on to show you. But if you take 7.8, let me turn this on. If you look at the frequencies of these pi and phi frequencies, they're all harmonics of the planet. So let my phone come up. I'll show you as part of what we're doing here. And the other part of it, the math of the Great Pyramid, is it was all based on nines. There was a raw table of nines. Nines are the number that goes to the next level. Think about it. You go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. When you get to 9, you put a 0 and put a 1 over, which means 1 9 happened plus 1 is a 10. So in base 10 math, you've got this whole situation. But here, check this out. This is fun.
Hey, you're a very interesting guy. I didn't know you're the side of you.
Well, this is what I'm into lately. I mean, I'll keep making film scores, right? All right. Yeah, all these things are something. This is waking up and getting all kinds of messages here.
Is any of your kids involved in music, by the way, or?
Actually, my son went to the Pyramid with me.
Yeah.
He's a musician, but the music business, as he emerged in the music business, what's happened in especially Los Angeles, if you're in the band business, you don't make any money. You play for free, and you pay to rent the sound system, and then you get the door if you get your friends to come and see the performance. So you're back to living on beer and pretzels. I mean, it's just crazy. All right, so check this out.
Yep.
If I take 7.8
and 54
times 54, 54 is a multiple of 9, right?
Yeah.
I push the equal sign. Look what you get. 421.2.
Yeah.
Well, remember the frequencies of the pi frequencies?
Yeah.
There's one of them right there. It's a multiple of the Schumann resonance. Now, I believe the actual I think it's 7.85 is really the fine tuner. Let's multiply that times 54. 423.97. What did Bateman show me in the beginning? 423.997. These are earth resonant frequencies that if you make music on them, you're in turn not only in tune with the planet, but you're in tune with humanity. These are the frequencies we operate on. Soul frequency. And this is way beyond making film scores, but I'm into it.
Of course.
I'm into it. So what can I tell you?
What's your take on Roswell incident, New Mexico? Did it happen? It real?
It all happened. They tried to cover it up.
Yeah.
They took the materials. There's this guy named Jerome Corsi.
Yeah.
He wrote the book The Day After Roswell. He was the guy who got all the spaceship parts and then turned around and passed them out into industry and like secretly for the transistor, for Velcro, for fiber optics, for printed circuits. They just took all the parts and that's what we have now. There was this huge surge right in the early 50s of all this technology, and it was stuff that they got from the spaceships. I'll tell you one other capper. So this guy Bateman that we're talking about.
Yeah.
When I went out to see him at his house, he was living in the desert up north Las Vegas. And there was all these pictures on the wall of him in Star Trek uniforms. Wes, what's that all about? Oh yeah, I used to work with Gene Roddenberry. Really? It says, oh yeah. He says, what happened was Bateman used to give lectures on UFOs in Silver Lake, which is, in Los Angeles. And his lectures were all about UFOs. And the attendees to his lectures was Gene Roddenberry and his writers. This guy Bateman was the source of the idea of the prime directive and the United Federation of Planets. And if you asked him who he was a Federation telepath. He was telepathically connected to the ships. And he used to take people out in the desert and have ships fly over on demand by asking them to fly over for him. And they would really do it. I know this is getting way far out and you don't need to believe it, but he did this for me one time. So that's why I'm giving testimony here. I was out in his house in the desert, and I'm sitting in his living room, and then he's talking into his hand one day like a Klaatu, Barado, Niktu. I'm going, ooh, this is getting weird. I like this. He says, I said, Wes, what do you need? He says, well, I'm asking if one of the ships will fly over for you tonight over the house. Okay. Later on that evening, I'm out in the backyard. He's not looking up at all. He's doing the telepathic thing like this. And he says, the pilot of the craft, he's got to check on his meter, on his prime directive meter to see if what he's going to do right now will violate the prime directive. And finally gets a white light and says, no, it's okay. You can just do this, it's not going to change anything. So I'm now sitting there and he says, look up now. And I look up, and maybe about lower than an airplane, I'll say maybe 10,000 feet, there's these two white dots that fly over. I go, holy mackerel, look at that. He goes, watch, they're going to do it again. They go around, and this time they come around, and one of the ships goes like a right angle turn, out and back and get in formation, back in formation. There's no way airplanes fly like this. There's no way. This was real craft. So here's the finale to this whole story. So he says, he really likes your vibration. I mean, again, because he's telepathic and he's saying, this is my buddy Alan. He says, the pilot's got one more thing for you. Just hold on. And he says, look up. I look up. And there's this white plasma burn in total silence, like 500 feet over top of me. Like, my eyes go wide. What just happened? He says, well, he liked you. So he kind of like revved the engine and popped the clutch and did a flying saucer peel out.
My God, man.
I couldn't say I didn't see it. It really happened. And this is the guy. This is the guy that was the source of Star Trek, now writing pyramid books. He was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. The worst businessman ever. Couldn't make anything happen with this stuff. In fact, always was afraid of being ripped off. So he was very, very guarded with all this stuff. But anyway, that's my story about that stuff. So they are real. I'll give testimony. I'll take a lie detector on it. There's no way I'm lying. It's real. So let's fast forward. So there really is a United Federation of Planets. There really are people in our government that are doing business. It's called the military industrial complex, the Lockheed Martins, the Boeings. They're already making spaceships. There's really an Area 51. We really got relationships with other folks. There's alien bases on the other side of the moon. We got bases now. We're so far along that we're actually doing commerce with them. You know, there's a great book called Selected by Extraterrestrials. The guy's name is William Tompkins. He was one of the drawings, one of the engineering drawing guys that worked at McDonnell Douglas designing spaceships for the government. I mean, full testimony. He tells all that happens. It's all real. But once we accept that it's real, society has to make a flip, right? Because the oil conglomerate makes all this money, and now they're trying to get rid of the oil conglomerate and give a new bunch of people that still have control over us. If we actually have free energy, if we have a thing in the back of our house about the size of an air conditioner that just gives off energy forever for free because it's a machine, that blows the whole power structure. So they're not going to let us have it.
Wow, fascinating, man. Man, I can talk to you for hours and hours and hours and hours.
I told you I got about 30 years we can talk as long as the internet holds up. But yeah, no, it's good to share with you. You have any other questions? I'm sorry I digressed, but you can use this all this stuff. This is all real.
No. I'm happy I'm recording this because I want to upload it to, with your permission, if I can upload it to the radio and people
Yeah.
join the stuff. And when are you going to be in Boston in the Coolidge Corner?
All right, so I have a concert in Boston, October 30.
Okay.
It's a Saturday night.
I need to fly to Boston and meet you there, man. We invite you to dinner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It'll be a good night. It's a 400 seat theater. It's in Brookline, which is
Brooklyn. I know. Yeah.
Right by the campus. It's going to be sold out.
Yeah, I went to a school in Boston, so I'm familiar with.
Okay.
With man, I have so many questions to ask you. I mean, is it okay if we can do like part 2 next Friday? I don't know if good.
Yeah. We can revisit for sure.
Yeah, and then we can talk about some of the soundtrack, Escape from New York. This is very, very good as well, and the Halloween, the Thing, and all the others that I have. And,
we can do a little rundown on each of the movies. What the stories.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. There's a philosophy that says details tell, but stories sell.
That's right.
People just love the stories, and I got stories forever.
Have you ever thought about doing like a radio show, a weekly radio show?
I really think about doing a podcast.
Like a podcast,
Yeah, I should do. I really need to do my own podcast. I've been focused on working now, so it's like I'm all by myself, much like you. I'm just a one guy thing, so it's very linear. If I don't do it, it doesn't get done. I don't have a staff or stuff like that. I could really gear up with some young people that want to hang around and empower all this stuff. Yeah, there's 2 books in me. One is all the Hollywood stories. The other is the story about these frequencies and the whole adventure. There's at least 2 books there.
Have you contacted a publisher company? I mean, if
I got
an advance for you to work on it, but then again, you need to pick between music and film score and the book, and hard to.
Well, the answer is yes. I've contacted some people. They've said they would help me get published, but it's still on me. And I'm not the greatest typer. So really what I need to do is just like what we're doing now. I need to talk into a recorder, record all that stuff, have it transcribed and turned into a book. That's the mechanics of it.
I got you. Yeah, got you. Man, Alan, thank you very much for your time. And man, I didn't anticipate that you knew all that kind of stuff, because it's a topic that really interests me. But
well, I'm for sure having fun.
Yeah, of course I'm having fun. But all the Escape from New York, the Halloween, the Travel Little China, the Prince of Darkness, They Live, and blah blah. Man, I can talk to you for days and days and days, man.
All right. Well, we'll focus a couple of our things. We'll focus on one movie and just do the front and back of that.
But you have so many stories, which is a real honor for me talking to you, Alan, for the last 2 hours. And we will do a follow up again next week. We'll do Fridays, if that works for you. We'll do one. And definitely want to meet you and then fly to Boston and have dinner with you in October the 30th and take you out to dinner. But definitely want to make arrangement, because I didn't know that you were being. Are you still with? I think John Carpenter was touring like up to like 2-3 years ago. Are you still in touch?
Yeah. So in John Carpenter's life experience, he has a son, Cody.
Yeah.
And his son's buddy Daniel. Daniel's father is actually Dave Davies from the Kinks.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
So he became friends with Dave, and the son, and Cody's very brilliant. So they've become his band. So he's not coming back to me for that stuff. The kids run all the stuff, and they're in his band, and he's John Carpenter. He can do whatever he wants.
That's
so
right. Yeah.
I'm just grateful for the fact that he touched my life in a way that I'm still going.
Sure, absolutely, man. And you mentioned that you like Tangerine Dream as well, right?
Sorry, repeat that.
You mentioned that you really like Tangerine Dream as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Tangerine Dream.
I have interviewed a lot of people that play in Tangerine Dream, and this morning it was for interview number 100. I did have the opportunity to talk to, in my opinion, one of the best electronic musicians in the history of humanity. Was called Manuel Goshin. I don't know if you're familiar with the album E2, E4. Yeah, I talked to him this morning. Very, very nice fellow. And in December, I'm going to Berlin for 10 days because I want to interview all the people that I have interviewed for the radio. I want to talk to them face to face, taking them to dinner, whatever. And I want to do like a film about Berlin School of Music, something like that, whatever I want to call it. So I'm very good at that.
Yeah, well, and well, certainly having a person like me or those guys talk, it's way better than reading a book.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned to you before, all my, every time that I mention this on the radio, all my radios are free. I buy a lot of music, my music collection, about 5,000 CD, 3,000 vinyl. I pay right to the musician to look at the radios are always going to be free forever. I don't need the money. I have done well. 24-hour day, whether you are in Shanghai or Mexico City or in Tokyo, 24-hour day, listen to great music, free of advertising, free of social media, BS, music and interviews about people that like music like yourself.
Yeah, and then we're all with the lockdown, we're all locked in our little living rooms and studios, but the internet is our friend. Here we are.
That's right, absolutely.
A nice afternoon for a couple hours, and
that's right.
Nobody had to wear a mask.
That's right. Thank you very much, Alan. Have a good evening, good afternoon for you, your wife, and your kids, and we'll be in touch very shortly. And I will send you the direct link for this interview as well. You can use it for your social.
All right, Claudio.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you. Great time.
Thank you.
Bye, buddy.